Right, well, good morning. It's lovely to see you all here. Last year, we had a discussion about trade a few days before the Brexit referendum. Miriam was on stage and said, I asked the audience to vote how many thought that there would be a vote for Brexit, and most of the room thought there wouldn't. And Miriam told us off and told us we were delusional and that there would be a vote for Brexit, and she was right. So we're very lucky to have all three of these ladies here this morning. But before we go to that, what I'd like to know from you all is, my first question is, at the moment the British government is still committed to pulling out of the single market. So how many of you will be negatively affected if Britain pulls out of the single market? Hands up. Okay, so quite a lot, but not maybe half the room. How many of you will be positively affected by Britain pulling out of the single market? Nobody? And how many of you prefer not to think about Britain and the single market? Okay, so some are leaning for their coffee. And then just my second question to you this morning is, how many of you think that over the next 5 years the world will become more protectionist? Hands up. Okay, so that's pretty much everyone in the room. How many of you, come on, there's got to be some optimists, or if that's optimism. How many of you think there will not be more protectionism in the next 5 years? So we've got a brave voice at the back, thank you. Great. What I'd like to do this morning is use the phenomenal expertise that we have on stage to really think about, are there ways that each of us can attempt to influence trade policy? It's got implications for all of our businesses, lives, activities, and I can't think of three better people to tell us about that. And I'd like to come, Miriam, to you first. Miriam González, a trade lawyer, international trade in particular. Miriam, what should the business folk in this room be doing to prepare for a world in which there are politicians, or, for example, in Britain, preparing to create new barriers to trade? What can they do?
Should I say first that I'm probably very much in the minority in this room, because I do agree with the person that put the hand up there in the corner, that we are not likely to see a much more protectionist world. My read of what is happening now is that we see more and more a distinction between the political narrative and what is happening on the ground. And the political narrative is going towards protectionism, particularly in certain countries, but it is true that it is expanding. We have seen the Buy America, we have seen the Buy Europe. Who would have thought that we would come to that situation? We have seen President Trump putting into question the WTO. Something that, in my view, is more likely to happen, though, is not so much protectionism. I think that free trade wins all the time, and we are too far down the chain on free trade to be able to backtrack very significantly. What I think that we are likely to see much more is the whole concept of fiscal and social dumping. And that is where the real game in terms of the new protectionism, in my view, is. In this country, the situation is quite different. What we are facing is the Brexit situation, of course. I actually think that one of the interesting questions could be to know how many of you have actually looked in detail at how affected you are by the single market. So not so much what is your perception, but have you actually looked in detail as to what that means? Because in my view, I don't think that you can really tackle a problem unless you really understand what is the problem. And in my view, I said last year that I thought that many people were being delusional and that we were going towards a slow motion car crash. I think that now we are spinning somehow, but there is a very high level of delusion. And to me, looking at it from outside, this seems like a society that has decided not to look at an issue and to look somewhere else.
And Miriam, so last year the call to action was get out and lobby to stop people voting for Brexit. This year, what's your call to action? I read that you're encouraging businesses to have a go at writing the clauses of a new free trade agreement. Is that what you would suggest? Should people in this room get involved, join their business associations?
For me, there are two issues there. What we have been doing with quite a lot of businesses and trade associations also is to analyze exactly, understanding that the government is not going to be able to negotiate because they don't have the resources, they don't really have the knowledge of all the different aspects, to say, look, this is the chapter. This is what you have to do. And this is when you see exactly the difference between the model that we seem to be going for and what we currently have. But for me, there is another much bigger issue there, which is that, in a way, Brexit is the least important thing that has happened to this society. I think that there is the structures are now too rigid to deal with the problem that we have on the table. So it's like if Westminster and the government themselves had become part of the problem rather than part of the solution. So I think that the only way forward is to do something like what in America is happening now in relation to climate change, which is to say, okay, in parallel to all this official action, business can organize themselves to do something in parallel. They can get together. You have amazing people in this country, in the business world. You have people who have more credibility in Brussels than the whole government and the cabinet and Westminster put together. Just get them together. Get your top 10, 15 business people. Try to give them some ammunition, some propositions, and send them to Brussels so that they can open a slightly different track.
Is anyone in the room doing that? Is there anyone in the room who's already part of a business group trying to influence the negotiations? Yeah, at the back. Do you have a comment on that? A tip for everyone else in the room? Sorry, there's a microphone coming.
So we are a very small company, but we still were sending people to Brussels all the time to discuss in business groups. But the risk is that once you're in, there's so many activities that it becomes a full-time job almost. But we did send, and even we are a company with only 200 employees, but we did send people. Especially over GDPR and other issues.
Right. Tina, you're Chief Political Analyst at Citi. We all read Tina's predictions and forecasts on the world. How are we going to know if protectionism is going to increase? There's two people in the room that think it won't. There's quite a lot that think it will. What should we be looking for if there's this, Miriam explained that there's a political push to protectionism, but it's not going to happen as much as it seems. What's your view? Is it, and what should we look for if we want to know?
Well, first of all, we should look to see if politicians are winning with this narrative, right? And obviously Donald Trump won and Brexit happened, but Emmanuel Macron won on a platform and won strongly, looks like, to get a majority in parliament as well, on an openly, pro-globalization and pro-EU free trade platform. Whereas the National Front, which certainly many of the investors that I spoke to were concerned would do well, may not even have enough seats to form a parliamentary grouping. So if we're seeing a change in the political winds compared to 2016, I wouldn't want to say that this anti-globalization populism has peaked, but if it's no longer a winning political proposition, I think we can count on politicians to start to change their tune. And I can also echo what Miriam has said about the sort of duality of this narrative. I was in Mexico last week where Mexican officials were remarkably upbeat about the renegotiation of NAFTA. So whilst, again, Trump won on this platform, it may not be as bad as feared, although it does seem to me that we're looking more at bilateral trade negotiations rather than big multilateral deals, perhaps as a consequence of the lack of political capital for governments to make these deals.
So do you have a question for Tina on the politics of protectionism? What is it that you're thinking you really want to know on the future of trade this morning?
Well, while we're waiting for people, maybe I can say something. I mean, we've seen the Trump election and this sort of the confusion still in this country around the Brexit outcome. Brexit means Brexit, but Brexit seems to mean different things to different people. Hard Brexit, soft Brexit, open Brexit. What does that all mean? As a social scientist, one of the things that I've tried to understand better in terms of what feeds into this anti-globalization sentiment, which, by the way, is mainly in the advanced economies. It's not the case in emerging markets where there's still support for globalization. And anxiety is something that's very much at the root of it, and not just economic anxiety, but cultural anxiety. And we need to, I think, understand these soft factors better if we want to try to dampen this narrative.
So you've brought up Brexit and the negotiations which will start in a few days' time between Britain and the European Union. Inga, Ernstsone, you know, Latvia joined the European Union in 2004, and you were part of the negotiating team, negotiating with all the other European Union partners on behalf of Latvia. And you had huge popular support. Latvia had its referendum, and 2/3 of Latvians supported joining the European Union. But you were in that room trying to make things work with all those partners. What would the top 2 tips be that you would give to Britain's negotiators who are going to be in the European Union trying to work out some kind of new free trade deal with European partners? Are there any tips that you could give them?
First of all, I have to say that the situations are not like 100% comparable, because we were moving towards joining the single market, and now with Brexit, the UK will be most likely leaving the single market. So it's not exactly comparable one-to-one. I do have confidence in the negotiating capacity of Britain. I think you are going to do well. But from our experience, I think the 2 things you have to be aware of, that you need 2 to tango. In this case, you need 28 to tango to come to a common result. So this cannot be neglected. Member states are very influential in the process. They are driving the process. So, and each member state has different economic interests. So you have to be ready to find compromise, to be ready to compromise, to come a good solution for all involved parties. And then the other thing is you can have exemptions, but these exemptions are probably not going to last forever. You have to be aware that you have to be ready to accept the requests from other sides.
And how much work did you and your Latvian colleagues put in to trying to understand all the different European interests, you know, the French agricultural interests or the German industry interests? How did you do that? How did you work out where your negotiating partners were?
Learning by doing, I think, through the process, talking to country representatives, looking at your economic interests. I think you have to understand first where your economic interest lies in the European market, and then approach those who are most important for you.
And can you remind us, when did Latvia first begin its accession negotiations?
98.
In 98.
98 and 99 we started already actively negotiating, and I believe we concluded in 2002, so it took us those 3-4 years to come to a final result.
Great. And do you think Britain can do it? Can Britain do a free trade agreement with, you know, with Latvia and the other 26 countries in the European Union?
Of course it can do it. I'm a believer of that we will find a common deal, common ground for a deal. It's in everybody's interest, and it goes both ways. I think the UK is very much interested to keep trade with Europe flowing. I believe UK's exports to Europe are more than 40%, right? So you cannot just cut it off from one day to another. I strongly believe, at least from my country's perspective, we definitely want a good deal. For us, a good deal would be the closest to what we have now.
So let's finish by looking at the world trade system, because people love to play pessimist and say, the world trade talks keep breaking down, the Doha development round's never going to end, that the world trade system seems broken against this wave of protectionism. But each of the three of you have been involved in different parts of the system that are working. We do have a set of world trade rules, and they do seem to be enforced. Are you optimistic they'll continue to be, Miriam?
The WTO rules are very minimal for the kind of guarantees that this country currently have with the European Union. If I can come back for one tiny sec to the difference between what happened with Latvia or any other countries that exceeded the European Union and what is going to happen with the UK, is that when you are exceeding the European Union, the European institutions hold your hand and bring you there. So you have all that support at practical level in the negotiations that the UK is not going to have from the European Union, because we are going to be in opposite sides and realizing that we are both going to end up, no matter what, we are going to end up in a worse place that we are going to be today. So the only issue is how much worse that is going to be. But to me, which is the main point that I wanted to make, is that in addition to all those practical issues about how we negotiate, there is the political situation. And it seems to me that right now, it is impossible to read what this country wants. It wanted Brexit, but it is not clear whether it wants a mandate for hard Brexit. It may be soft Brexit, which is what most people are interpreting in the street. But actually, in Westminster is full of people who have voted for a mandate on hard Brexit. And it seems to me that the responsible thing to do is to play for time, to place the country, to park it somewhere there, whether it's EFTA, the EA, somewhere similar to what you have right now, for 2-3 years, and think about what you want to do. Whether it's out of the single market, whatever it is, do it, but do it competently, not simply because you have stumbled upon it.
And the rules are certainly out of date, and that's the problem with the no-deal solution.
But that means a Norway situation. That means Norway option as a maybe a waiting room.
For a little while.
But Tina, can I ask you, just before we close, there's quite a good report that Chad Bowen's done on trade, but curiously, he calls it President Trump's stealth protectionism. It's the first time I've seen President Trump accused of stealthiness. And yeah, I think he's been pretty open about the protectionism he wants to bring on steel and lumber and aluminium and all kinds of sectors. Is that really going to happen? And if it happens, will the rest of the world take the United States to the WTO in a dispute process?
Well, the second part of the question is probably better answered by my trade expert colleagues, but it's not the first time a politician has campaigned on a narrative that was largely emotional and then selectively implemented. But what's different about Trump, I would say, is, I mean, he has already done past tariffs against Canada, that great, enemy of the United States. But Trump is someone who uses these policy options, instrumentally, right? Mm-hmm. And to send a message. So I am not sure it's the breakdown of the system, not least because no US president is in power forever, but he's doing what in international relations we call signaling, right? He's signaling to his base, look, I am doing something about this, but he didn't name China a currency manipulator. On the instrumentalist point, he also has brought in cooperation with China on North Korea as a reason for not doing this. Now, diplomats are horrified about that. That's very much not part of the playbook. So, he's using it when he needs to, and perhaps in a more of a quid pro quo kind of a way, but it doesn't signal the end of the system.
Alas, our time is up. What can you take away from this morning's discussion? The protectionist push is political, as Tina and Miriam have reminded us, but underneath it, trade is really about the detail. It's about detailed trade agreements, and Miriam is saying, get out there, influence those agreements, think about what your business needs are from the single market, from the global trading system. Tina's saying, don't assume that the politics will take us straight to protectionism, and Inga's reminding us that it is very difficult to negotiate with large trading blocs, whether it's the European Union or others, but you can do it. It's got to be done in a collaborative, cooperative spirit. I think that's going to be the challenge for Britain. Thank you all so much for this morning's debate.